Hi, I'm Kate Kripke, and welcome to the Motherhood Uncut podcast. This podcast brings the reality of motherhood to the table for real, honest conversations. Here we laugh, we cry, we learn, we grow, we are awestruck, amazed, humbled, and validated. But most importantly, together we begin to live in a new way that allows us to recognize the immense role that our own health and well-being plays in the health and well-being of our kids. Together we recognize that everything we do to take care of our physical, psychological, social, and spiritual health is in service of our children. This season, we're diving deep into the role that the shoulds and shouldn'ts and rules and expectations play in our motherhood journey. Together this season, we will learn to break those boundaries that hold us back from our greatest potential. We're going to be hearing from the moms who have taken this risk, from experts who help in this journey, and from family members who, Lord help me, have important insight to share. So pull up a chair, my friend, make a cup of tea, pour a glass of wine, put on your walking shoes, turn up the volume in your car. Let's do this together because nobody should mother alone. Today, I get to share with you a deeply inspiring conversation that I had with Allison Mathis Jones. Allison's story takes us from an unexpected brain tumor to a deep reverence for beauty, and her story is both vulnerable and brave. While speaking truthfully about her continued challenges with OCD and anxiety, she also shows us what it looks like to do the work to move through those moments of uncertainty and unpredictability that so often frees us up. Allison describes herself as a believer, wife, mama, part-time expat, relationship expert, self-care advocate, content creator, and self-published author. And she's here today to tell you what her life looks like and feels like day to day. Let's dive in. Hey, if you're a mom balancing a demanding career or other passions in life with the joys and challenges of raising young kids, I want you to know that I see you. I understand the pressure to be perfect at work and at home and the constant feeling that you might be falling short in both. You're not alone, and there is a way to feel more in control and connected. It's pretty universal, right? When we become moms, we jump into action mode. We focus all of our attention on our kiddos, and we fall farther and farther away from allowing ourselves to tend to what we need to also feel okay. With all the to-dos, any resources spent on ourselves feel unnecessary, wasted, and maybe even selfish. But of course, whether we acknowledge it or not, we all learn very quickly that we simply can't be our best in anything when we're depleted. But here's the thing I also want you to understand today. When moms like you and me are stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed, it doesn't just affect us. It can have long-lasting effects on our kids' mental health and development. The pressure you're feeling could be shaping your child's future in ways you never imagined. When we are overwhelmed, it's easy to fall into the trap of perfectionism, trying to meet impossible standards in both our careers and motherhood. But that pressure doesn't just hurt us. It impacts our kids too because we become more anxious. We take more things personally and we have very little tolerance for any discomfort that our children feel. Kids who grow up without a secure attachment are more likely to struggle with anxiety, insecurity, and difficulties forming healthy relationships. They absorb our stress and it can lead to challenges that affect their entire lives. But it doesn't have to be this way. That's why I created the Calm Connection System, a transformative science-based program specifically designed to help turn your guilt, anxiety, and overwhelm into clarity, confidence, and calm. With the Calm Connection System, you can break free of the pressures that hold you back. You can nurture a secure attachment with your kiddo, and you can still thrive in your career or other passions outside of motherhood. I've spent 20 years as a maternal and child mental health specialist, helping more than 6,000 women just like you transform their lives with strategies that are practical, science-backed, and deeply empathetic. As a mom of 2 teenage daughters, I've walked this path myself, balancing the demands of motherhood with a career that I am passionate about. I know what it takes to find that balance, and I'm here to guide you every step of the way. But the Calm Connection system isn't just about managing your stress. It's about creating a life where you can pursue your ambitions and be the mom that you want to be. A life where you and your children feel secure, connected, and capable of facing the world with confidence. If you're ready to take the first step towards a more balanced, fulfilling life for you and your family, I invite you to book a free call with me in the next few days. Let's talk about how the Calm Connection system can help you create the life for you and your children that you all deserve while continuing to share your incredible gifts with the world. Book your call now so we can discuss whether or not this program is a fit for you. And regardless, you're going to walk away from our call with new clarity about what's causing your anxiety and things that you can do to access more confidence and calm, both at home and at work. I'm going to make sure that you have a few easy things that will help you right away, whether we work together or not. As a reminder, decades of research has confirmed that untreated anxiety in moms causes anxiety in kids. And the fastest and most effective way to make sure that your kiddo is healthy is to do what you need to do to make sure that you are healthy. You absolutely can excel both outside of motherhood and inside of motherhood, giving your child everything that they need to live a long, healthy, and happy life. This call is where you start, and the link is in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you there. Hey, listeners, I want to tell you about the One Clock. The One Clock is a clock that is designed to help you wake up in the way that your nervous system most needs to move through the day with calm and clarity. You know those clocks that wake you up in the morning with that loud beep that jars you out of sleep, with your heart racing? This is not the One Clock. The One Clock is designed with Grammy Award-winning musicians that have taken the science behind waking up and turned that into the most amazing music that you have ever woken up to. It's going to help you start your day with ease and clarity. And not only that, but the clock itself, it's like a piece of art. It is beautiful. So if you're looking for something to help you manage your nervous system and start your day that's going to set you up for success, I invite you to check out the One Clock. Information is in the show notes. Okay, Allison Jones, welcome to the Motherhood Uncut podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to see you. Yeah, you and I talked when I was still in Japan, and now we get to reconnect and dive into this important conversation. Before we dive in, I'm just going to share with our listeners a little bit about you so that they have a general sense of what you are bringing to our incredible podcast table here.
Sounds great.
For our listeners, Allison Jones is a believer, wife, mama, part-time expat, relationship expert, self-care advocate, content creator, and self-published author. Because of her husband's basketball career, she has lived in 6 different countries and currently splits her time between Dubai and her hometown, Atlanta, Georgia. And I think, Allison, we are going to get a chance to talk about what it's like to raise children while you are moving around so much.
It's been a wild ride.
That's right. That's right. So she and her husband, Daquan, Daquan, am I saying that right?
Yes, you're right. We all call him DJ though, so that's fine too.
DJ, our college sweethearts, which I love. They welcomed their first child, Harper, in July 2019, and being a mom has been her favorite adventure yet. Their son, Jackson, joined the party in February 2022. So really what we're going to be diving into here is this really incredible part of your story. So not long after spending a few months in Japan, which is near and dear to my heart, Allison was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor and had brain surgery just days later. Allison struggled during her recovery and was reminded of the Japanese art and mindset of kintsugi, which we're going to talk quite a bit here today about. The time-honored Japanese art of repairing broken pottery using lacquer mixed with gold to highlight the beauty of imperfection. She fully embraced this mindset and imagery through her recovery and wanted to share the message that broken is beautiful with the world. So she created a brand devoted to doing just that. A candle company, children's book, a podcast were all formed from this brand. Allison, you are a big believer that so-called imperfections are what make each and every one of us special. And what I love is that we all have a little gold-filled crack of our own, shimmering traces that tell a unique story of resilience and renewal. So, Allison, welcome to the
Thank
conversation.
you. Thank you. Thank you. It's so funny hearing other people talk about you because you're like, huh, I did do all those things. I have lived all that life.
Yeah, that's great. A couple things that stand out to me about you, which I think we can kind of weave in and out of our conversation, is that you are a mom. You are a busy mom that is, so much of what many of us think we need in order to feel steady and stable is a steady and stable environment. And one of the things that I think you have really had to work at doing is finding that stability within the unpredictability and uncertainty, and let me call it chaos, of moving around quite a bit since you became a
Absolutely.
mom. So we can talk about that. Also, your incredible story about your having a brain tumor and surgery and recovering from that, and really, I think, making meaning of that scary, I'm sure, life-changing medical diagnosis,
Right.
which I think is really important for us to hear from you about. What does it look like to come from something that's so hard and so scary and make meaning of it? One of the things I love is that you have a podcast with your mom that's dedicated to making sense of all of the what do we do when we're making mistakes and we feel broken, and how do we shift that to really understanding the beauty of that. And also, there are some patterns of generational trauma and moving that aside and doing things new in the present
Absolutely.
moment. Of course, your mom parenting you and you parenting your kids. So there's so much here.
So
There is
many
so much
layers.
here.
So many layers.
Can you just start by, in your own words, sort of summarizing your motherhood journey for us, really letting us into your heart, your mind, your story of becoming and being a mom? And we can take as long or as little as we need to with that.
Yeah, so, it's funny because in my bio and, you kind of telling the audience about me, you kind of talked about the motherhood piece before the brain tumor, but it's actually switched, which I have to point out because I only found out, really, I think, that I had the brain tumor because me and my husband decided we wanted to try for babies.
Yes.
So this was, gosh, 2018 in February, and my husband and I had been married for about 5 years. We were definitely one of those couples. We got married young. We were 24 when we got married, but we were kind of like, we want to enjoy each other. We want to take our time. Even though we're married, we don't want to like jump into, parenthood and having a family yet. We wanted to really spend some
Yes.
time just the two of us, especially because of his career. We were traveling a ton. And so we were married about 5 years before one morning I woke up and I was just kind of like, huh, it would be kind of nice if a baby was here with us. And so, he was on the same page as me, and we decided to start trying. And because of that, I got off of birth control. And, we can open a whole nother can of worms talking about, the hormones and things that we as women put in our bodies and all of that. But basically, long story short, when I came off of birth controls, it allowed the hormones in my body to do things that they had not been doing prior because, my hormones were being, for lack of a better word, controlled by my contraceptive. And that is when I started having what I now know was brain tumor symptoms. At the time, I just thought that these were headaches, but they were brain tumor symptoms. And so I like to mention that because I'm kind of like, wow, like my journey to motherhood actually started with this brain tumor and, with this experience. And so, as you said, I got my brain tumor diagnosis literally kind of on a whim. I went to the doctor and was kind of like, hey, I'm having these terrible headaches. Can you just give me something so that I don't have these headaches anymore? And she absolutely thought they were headaches because my mom also has migraines. And so this is genetic. This is a generational thing that is handed down to you. They're definitely migraines. We'll get you some help for them. However, before I prescribe you anything, let's just have an MRI to be safe. But she was totally nonchalant because it wasn't that she was a bad doctor. She just really thought that they were migraines as well. So I was not really in a rush to have this MRI. I went on a whole vacation, like I'll just get it when I get back type of thing. But I did eventually go and get it. And literally, after the first scan, the MRI technician, I will never forget, she was like, I'm gonna call your husband back here. And I'm like, okay, a little bit of a red flag, like, all right. And she called us both into like the back office, which they are absolutely not supposed to do. An MRI technician is not really supposed to let you see any of your scans. She's supposed to have the doctor do that. But she was like, you're young, you guys are a beautiful couple. She's like, I just cannot let you leave without showing you this because I want you to understand how big of a deal this is and for you to like take your health seriously and do what you need to do. So she was like, you see right there. And she pointed, to my brain and she was like, that's abnormal. She's like, I can't say what it is because I'm not a doctor and I don't know, but like, there's definitely something there that I want you to, you know, get taken care of. So I am a very, realistic and logical person. I'm a Virgo. I don't know if you know a lot about horoscopes, but we're definitely very type A, like very just factual, give us the answers and let us find a solution. And so I was immediately like, well, let me call my doctor. Let me see when she can get me in so we can figure out what's next. My husband, on the other hand, is like shaking, like visibly getting upset. And I'm like, kind of like, well, calm down. Like, let's just figure out,
And
what
Allison,
to
is
do.
this typical of you to be a doer, a fixer, a problem solver, intellectual, analyzing?
Absolutely. That
Yeah,
is who I am with my
yeah,
family, with my friends. I am the problem solver, the planner,
yeah.
and that is actually kind of an important part of my story because we can talk about this a bit in a second when I get to my recovery, but I feel like also pre-brain tumor, I took on a lot of people's problems, but we can talk about that momentarily. So basically, I call my doctor's office. She's of course at lunch because your doctor's always at lunch when you really, really need to talk to them. And so they're like, yeah, we'll have her call you back, whatever. So the doctor calls back later that day. By this point, she's gotten the scans and she is like, it sounds like she's in tears, like her voice is shaking. And she's like, I am so sorry that I basically missed this. I think that she felt really bad and really scared. Um, because I don't think that she knew she's not a brain doctor. She's just like a general practitioner. So being that I was what 27, 28, I think that she was like really scared that she had basically painted this picture to me like I was fine when I wasn't and what the implications were for that. So she was like, I have already called a neurologist. Like, you have an appointment for tomorrow. Like, I didn't even want you to have to go through a referral process and try to make your appointment. She was like, if you want the appointment, like you have an appointment tomorrow. Like, so she was very, very proactive in helping me to figure out what was going on. Quite literally, the next day I went to the neurologist. The neurologist was like, you have a benign meningioma, which thankfully is a brain tumor that really sits on the outside of your brain as opposed to the inside. And I say thankfully because I can't help but to think that my story would probably be a little different if it was a different type of tumor.
Mm,
And benign, obviously, a lot of us know that means non-cancerous.
yes,
The doctor was like, we can't say 100% that it's benign until we take it out and, tested, biopsy it, all of that. But these types of tumors are about 90% benign. And so we're not going to even think cancer. Like it's
yes.
probably not that. And so I want to think this was on a Tuesday or Wednesday. And the neurologist was like, I have an opening on Friday morning. I can do your craniotomy and remove it. And me being the problem solver, I'm like, yes, like get this out of my head right now. My mom is like, do you want a second opinion? I'm like, nope, I want it out of my brain. So had surgery, a few days later, and the rest is kind of history. We can talk more about my recovery process, of course, but as it relates to motherhood, I remember, I still am wanting to get pregnant because there's something about, I think, us as women, when we decide we're ready, like we're ready today. Like I want a baby now.
Yeah.
And so I remember, I I think I went to see my OBGYN like 2 months post surgery and I'm like, can I get pregnant now? And she's like, why don't you give your body like a little time to heal? Like
You're a
take
mover and a shaker,
I'm
girl,
like,
right?
no, like I wanted a baby before this brain tumor. So like I want a baby today, like. And so I had my brain surgery in April. In November, we got pregnant with Harper. So, it was the sweetest. I won't say she like came from the brain tumor, but the brain tumor, feels like a small price to pay, if you finally get to live your lifelong dream of becoming a mom, because I definitely have always been one of those people that when I was growing up and people were like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was the kid that was like a mommy, and so that was kind of the icing on the cake, was getting pregnant, what was it, 6 months, 7 months post brain tumor.
Allison, there are a few things I just want to note here before we move on. One is that, I think it's probably fair to say that anyone who gets a diagnosis like that is faced with the reality of life or death, right? It's like, meaning it's like, oh, there's a brain tumor. I'm going to have brain surgery. No one told you were going to die, thankfully, but you're going in for brain surgery. So I imagine that at some point in there, there's a refocusing of life. Once you come out, the tumor is no longer in your brain. You've been given a clear bill of health. Was that part of your experience? You came out of this like
It absolutely was.
ready
And
to
I
live?
will say, going into my surgery in that, 3 days that I had, I don't think that I was really afraid then. And I think I didn't have time to be. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
get
I
it.
think that I didn't really have time to process, which some may say that's a bad thing. I think for me, it was probably a good thing, because I probably would have been terrified had I
Sure.
had time to really process or Google, like, what is this surgery going to be like? All of that stuff. However, after the fact, I think honestly, probably the moment I woke up, it occurred to me like they were like in my head.
Yeah.
And I think that's when it occurred to me like, wow, like I could have died, and even my mom, of course, I didn't find this story out until after the fact. My mom, she's not like me, but she is, in that she held it all together really well
Yeah.
throughout this whole process. My husband is like in shambles, and me and my mom are like, everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
But I know that I was told after the fact that when the doctor came out, the surgeon came out to tell them that I was in recovery, my mom lost it,
Yeah, of
like
course.
lost it. And it was like that moment that, okay, everything's okay, but it could have gone differently. And I think that I had a similar experience, waking up in the hospital, you're connected to all these things, and you're like, wow, this was a really big deal.
Yes. It was a big deal, and it was surrounded with so much uncertainty and unpredictability, right? I think that's part of what you didn't know you had this brain tumor. You went in for headaches. All of a sudden, you were given this other piece of information. There was no, you went into surgery, you came out, you were okay. There's so much that you can't, untangible stuff in
Yeah,
there, which of course also exists in motherhood, right? The other thing that I wanted to just kind of recognize here is that we miss things. And I want to like pause for a moment and recognize that there are probably a number of our listeners who struggle with anxiety.
hmm,
Hearing your story makes them feel anxious about their own health, right? Because here's this healthy, energetic, adventurous woman who's going into the doctor and ends up with this big diagnosis. And so I just want to sort of hold space in our conversation and for those listeners with the reality of here we are again. Uncertainty, unpredictability. And it's also something that causes so much anxiety in life, but anxiety in motherhood. And, you're doing just fine. You're probably stronger for it, right? So this has a very happy ending, but it's a big deal to recognize that we can't always know, right? We
absolutely. We
won't
can't.
always know.
I have struggled with anxiety, I mean, even way pre brain tumor and still today, but this was one of those things that is 100% just out of your control, and there's nothing that you can't plan it. You can't, even I remember after the fact, me trying to plan the rest of my life. Initially, I couldn't really even do that. I'm on all this medication. They're talking about like, well, if you have seizures after your surgery, and I'm like, seizures? Like what? Like what is this going to look like? And it definitely was a season for me of having to like lean on my village, right? And let people take care of me, which can be hard for me, and B, just recognize that there is so much that we don't know and that we have to just kind of be okay with, which is hard. It's hard period. And it's especially hard, even in motherhood for me now. So
Well, maybe we could just take a side of path to the side here for a moment about this, because you did struggle with some postpartum challenges, mental health challenges after you had your first baby, I think, or your second. I can't remember, first, second, both. When you became,
probably both.
yeah, sure. You are someone who has struggled with anxiety in the past, and you're really talking about needing to develop a different relationship with all of this uncertainty, unpredictability, not knowing, right? Talk to us a bit about what that was like for you, how you navigated the, the diagnosis. Of course, we've kind of talked about that in the surgery, but the recovery, the moving into motherhood with this history of anxiety. And of course, this way of moving through the life, which so many of our listeners can relate to, of high achieving, problem solving, fixer, doer, get things done. How have you navigated all of this uncertainty and unpredictability coming from that place?
Yeah, I mean, it's been difficult, especially because we haven't talked a ton about my husband's basketball career, but that has been something that has been interesting for me as someone who likes to control and plan. I mean, we're talking right now as we speak. It is, getting towards the end of summer, and we're talking right now where like he could get a call at the end of this week and be gone the next week for a
He's a
contract. And
professional basketball player, just for our,
professional basketball
yeah.
player, yes. And it has been like this throughout our entire marriage. It was like that even with my brain tumor. He had to leave about 2 weeks after my surgery to fly to China. And actually, after we left the MRI appointment that day, we went to get our visas to go to China because I was supposed to go to China too. And me being me, I was still, even when I found that I was having surgery, was like, well, I can just join you in China in like 4 weeks, totally not knowing what I had ahead of me in terms of my recovery. But, you know, I still struggle a ton with just managing uncertainty and things I can't control. Fairly recently, I was diagnosed with OCD, and my therapist walked me through kind of why anxiety wasn't necessarily an appropriate diagnosis for me, and that my anxiety stems from my OCD more so than, it just being anxiety on its own. And I have a background in mental health. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and that it totally went over my head until someone literally took out the DSM and walked me through what OCD looked like and how OCD can look like anxiety for a lot of people and lead to anxious symptoms, but sometimes be a lot more, not more difficult. They're both difficult, but different to handle than anxiety. I wish that I had answers like for the listeners about like, oh, this has really helped me to handle this, but this is still something that I deal with every single day. Like, I mean, literally last week, my husband and I went out for a date night, or we were going out for a date night. And my daughter, both of my kids are really great sleepers. I've been very blessed with good sleepers. I know not everyone has that. On this particular night, my daughter just would not go to sleep. She's 5, and she was just crying, coming out of her room, always wanting us to come into her room. And in my brain, I said, maybe we shouldn't go on our date because maybe the reason that she's crying is because we're gonna die. And, that's what that means. And like, we shouldn't go on our date because, like, what if we don't ever come back? And what if her outburst tonight, like, means something? And thankfully, my husband knows that my brain can kind of play tricks on me. So he's like, think about all the times that we have gone out on a date and we've come back and the kids have been fine. Like, you got to face this fear. You got to go anyway, because if you don't go, then you're giving the OCD power over your life. And so we went anyway, and everything's fine. But that's just an example of how I still mentally struggle with this uncertainty and thinking that things mean something. And I will say that after my brain surgery and that whole experience, my symptoms did for a while improve. And I think that, like you said, it was kind of like an awakening to the fact that I went through this period of uncertainty and things were okay. And it kind of reassured me that it's okay to not know the outcome. But as soon as we get through one, battle and we think, all right, that's behind me. Then you have kids and it's a whole nother can of worms. It's a whole nother, a whole nother two people to worry about. And, the saga continues.
So Allison, just to press pause for a moment, I think you're talking about a really common and a really challenging experience for many, many, many women.
Mhm.
In my, 2 decades of being a clinician in maternal mental health, I would say that more times at not, if not, I mean, almost always, women who struggle with OCD and OCD-like symptoms are high achieving women who really have a sense of needing to be in control to feel okay.
Yeah.
Right. And this way in which, to use your words and your husband's words, your brain can play tricks on you, right? Really, what we're talking about here is what happens when you're sitting in a situation where the only real answer is, I don't know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for many women who oftentimes are doers and achievers and high functioning and all those things, I don't know is not an okay answer.
Right.
Right? And so the OCD symptoms, whether that be symptoms that are thought-based or behavior-based, kick in to try to get away from that feeling, that discomfort that comes with not knowing. This
Right.
is very, very common, actually. And I sort of love this, we're kind of morphing into this whole conversation today about what does it mean to actually not know and be okay with not knowing. And be okay is sort of a word and, a term in quotes I'd written down when you were talking earlier. This really interesting thing that I think you probably came out of your brain tumor and mothering and even your anxiety treatment and recovery is, can you be okay even when you don't feel okay?
Mhm.
And that's what we're talking about, right? Those brains that want to be fixers and problem solvers are like, I am only okay if I feel okay.
Yeah.
And the question is, can you be okay even if you don't feel okay?
Mhm.
How do you respond to that question or that statement?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've had to learn and deal with because if I, at this point in my life, I'm almost 34, if I thought or let feeling okay dictate if I'm okay, then I'd probably spend the most of my days not okay.
Yeah.
And I can't really do that in this season of life with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old that need me to more days than not be okay. I mean, we all have our days where we're just not, no matter how we feel, we're just not okay. But, I think that I have had to learn that feelings, especially as it relates to uncertainty, are just that. And as cliche as it may sound, I can't waste the present by like living in the future so much because that's what I like to do so much is try to plan, 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 plan. And it takes me away from the here and now. And I'm like, wow, I'm feeling not okay because I'm trying to plan next week. But in this exact moment, whatever is going to come next week, whether it's good or bad, is not here yet. So let's just stay here where in this given moment, everything's good. Everything's
Yeah.
fine.
It's sort of a low bar, but actually a really helpful bar to recognize that as long as we're breathing, we're actually okay.
Hmm.
Right? I can feel deep fear, deep pain, deep anxiety, deep grief, deep anger, deep sadness, and still be okay, meaning I'm still surviving this deep pain and discomfort. And a lot of times, from a mental health perspective, that's so intolerable. We don't believe that we're okay. We don't believe we're going to be okay. Right. And so it sounds like you are really working. Again, you've had these experiences sort of force this upon you, but really working in your life to figure out, okay, with ironically, as someone who's a high achiever and likes to be in control and likes to have all the answers, you certainly have a life where you've got a lot of unpredictability and uncertainty. Your husband's basketball career,
Absolutely do.
2 children. I mean, we could go on, and you're doing it. You're moving through with, you know, I find you to be through a screen incredibly uplifting, joyful, easy to be with, inspiring. And I don't believe, actually, Allison, that everybody who fears uncertainty and unpredictability shares that, dare I say, a cliche word, vibe, energy. So I don't know how you're going to answer this question, but what do you think allows you to move through life with this sense of joy and hopefulness and excitement and gratitude and creativity that you obviously do, even when you have such a tendency to fear uncertainty and to end up with symptoms of OCD and anxiety? I mean, those are two things that we have a major both and here. They're both true for you. For many women, they can't access the lightness that you clearly feel.
Well, I'll give two answers that are really the same answer, but can be taken and perceived different ways depending on your beliefs. For me, I would say the first answer would be my faith. And the second answer, for those that might have different beliefs than me, would be leaning on what I know is true, which is also faith, but we can take those to mean different things depending on our beliefs. I remember a time when this time of year, which is contract season, is what we call it in the basketball world, it used to be like debilitating for me, where I would try to, before I had kids, I would try to basically sleep through it. Like I would try to take like naps because I was so anxious and so wound up. And that was to me like the only way to deal with it. Like I'm just gonna sleep because this is too much for me. Not knowing where we're gonna sign and for how much money and what's gonna come was just too much. And now I really am just kind of, I look for evidence in the past for all the times in my life, brain tumor included, that it's been a period of unknown and everything has been okay. And that's the short answer, is that, when I feel myself getting all worked up and like overwhelmed with it, I do look for that evidence. I look for what I know to be true. I look for what the past has shown me and what my life experiences have shown me. And I just like grab hold to that and hold on to it as tight as I can until the moment passes. The moments used to take a lot longer to pass than they do now, thankfully.
Yeah. 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 So you're relying on your faith. You're relying on this belief that you're being held in some way through these challenges. You're relying on the evidence. I love that word, that in all the other hard times where you've been scared, you've gotten through and been okay. I think that's a really important mindset and reminder for those listeners who haven't figured out how to practice that yet, or who are beginning the process of shifting their thinking towards, rather than future catastrophic, thinking, to shifting towards really relying on the truth and what they know to be true, if we get out all the what if thinking out of the way. And I think it's lovely to be able to hear you describe your process. And of course, your honesty about still being in it. I mean, aren't we all?
I'm still in it. Every single day I have a moment where I'm like, okay, when something like this has happened before, what was the outcome? And I have to go back to it. Especially in motherhood. To be honest, like even, dropping my kids off at school, still, I love dropping them off at school, but it brings me anxiety. Like I am giving the two most precious things to me to someone else. I'm trusting them, to take care of them. Like it is a lot for me as someone who likes to control things and, feels like I am somehow all powerful to keep them safe, which is not at all true. But I have to think about, what about yesterday? How did that go? What about last week? How did that go? What about that day when maybe Jackson, my son, did scrape his knee and everything was actually okay? I have to just go back to it and lean on it and take a deep breath.
So we know that the only way to build resilience is through pain, right? Or through challenge. And it's interesting how I've never met a mom that doesn't say she wants her child to be a resilient human, right? And of course,
We don't want our kids to go through anything hard.
Desire to keep them in a bubble and expect them to be resilient. And it's the knee scrapes, and sometimes it's the brain tumor that helps people to become resilient. And so, yeah, I love your examples. I want to shift for a minute to your podcast with your mom.
Yes.
which we'll link in the show notes, and to the title of your podcast with your mom, and to this idea of kintsugi. And, for folks that don't know, well, why don't you explain to folks what that is, since
Sure.
you,
So I've had to explain kintsugi and, break down the pronunciation of it a time or two since I kind of attached it to my brand and my persona. Basically, in Japan, it's kind of an ancient practice of a ceramic, let's say it breaks, let's say it falls on the floor. In our culture, American culture, 9 times out of 10, we're going to just throw that in the trash and say, that's done. It's broken. We have no use for it anymore. Instead of doing that, what they do in the practice of kintsugi is they pick up all those little cracked pieces and they put them back together using gold glue. It's a shimmery gold, for lack of a better word, glue that makes the item whole again. And the whole premise is that the item is more beautiful than it was before it fell and shattered in the first place. And I just specifically, as I was recovering from my brain tumor, I just like really felt like that whole practice spoke to what I had been through and spoke to like, wow, I had this really kind of terrible thing, that happened to me. But because of it, like I am a new person and I am a better person. And as it relates to our podcast, well, even before the podcast, I wrote a children's book about the practice of kintsugi called Kintsugi Conversations. And what sparked the children's book is actually when my daughter was 1, she fell in my bathroom floor. She was trying to like grab my leg while I was trying to walk. I don't know if that's ever happened to other moms. Like you're trying to move, your kid's trying to come, and
yes, of
I was
course.
still trying to get to where I was going, and she didn't get that. Long story short, she fell in my bathroom floor and she chipped her tooth. And as a new mom, I just felt like this was the worst thing that was ever going to happen to her. Like, how is she going to go through life with this chipped baby tooth that is going to fall out one day? But at the time, this is my first and only kid, like I was hysterical. However, after, months of realizing that this chipped tooth really meant nothing, the dentist told us it was fine, all of those things. I thought, how would I want my daughter to feel about this chipped tooth should it stay? Like, would I want her to feel like ashamed of this chipped tooth? Like, how would I want her to like react to it? Like, what part of her story should this chipped tooth be? And it took me back to Kintsugi again. And I kind of thought to myself, wow, like this chipped tooth, like it kind of gives her like flair. It makes her unique. It's something different. It's a part of her little story. And so I wrote the Kintsugi Kid kind of to teach children about the Japanese art of kintsugi in a way that was digestible to a child and kind of teach them that we all have these things that are going to happen to us throughout life and they're going to make us better, instead of making us worse in the long run. And then came Kintsugi Conversations, which is the podcast that my mom and I do together. My mom had a not ideal upbringing. I mean, she did not have a good relationship with her mom or either of her parents. And a lot of people, we hear a lot that someone maybe is not a good parent because they didn't have a good parent and they don't know how to do it. And instead of letting her childhood break her and define her and make her mean and cruel and cold towards me, she said, you know what? I'm going to use every single bad experience that I had growing up to be a better mom. And so we just thought that, as we have these conversations on our podcast about truly any and everything under the sun, we just thought or I thought that I wanted to acknowledge the fact that she made something beautiful, our relationship, out of something broken, her own childhood.
You are, speaking about something that is incredibly important for all mothers, in my opinion, to reflect on, right? We have control, actually. We don't have control about what happened in the past, and we certainly don't have control over our environment, but we do have control over our choices and our actions and our thoughts, right? And that, when we're able to reflect on our history of being raised as we become mothers and have the opportunity to raise other humans, we get to decide what to do that's similar to how we are raised and what to do that's different. We
Mhm.
get to choose. And so, there is this, we've talked about this a number of different times already in this conversation, but turning tragedy and trauma into strength and beauty.
Mhm.
That's what we're talking about. That's what your mom chose to do when she, trauma, big T or little t, right? But that's what your mom chose to do when she had you and raised you. That's what you chose to do after your brain tumor and in all of these sort of bumps along the road in motherhood. And it's what kintsugi does as a creative practice and also as a visual art. So I was in Japan, as you know, and I sat with a friend of mine who was born and raised in Japan, who taught me how to do kintsugi when I was there. And I have a funny story to tell, which is that I took a plate, which, I wasn't broken, but I had it with me to break to do. And I dropped it thinking it would crack in one, the perfect crack. And
Yeah.
of course, it broke in like 8 different pieces,
Mhm.
which, as someone who's done kintsugi, is
That's
not
hard.
easy when you're
Yeah.
needing to balance these things together. And I think so many of our listeners are sort of perfectionists or, again, high achievers, and we like to do things really well. And I wanted to do this really well. And I learned within moments of dropping that platter or that plate that it wasn't going to turn out the way I wanted it to. And it took me this moment of like, I could feel myself resisting and should I try again with a different bowl? And I was doing all those things we do in our head when we want to redo, we want to go back and do it again, or if only and then I just let go and I was like, let's just see what happens.
Mhm. Let's lean into what this is really about instead of letting our nature take over here.
And not only was it beautiful in the end, but it was really fun to
Can you
put it
please, if you
together.
have a picture of this plate, you have to put it in the show notes because I
I
want to
will,
see it, and I'm sure everyone else does too.
I will put it in the show notes. But I think what I want to say as a metaphor is life can feel so hard, right? Motherhood can feel so hard when we're trying to not make mistakes, not fall down, not get sick, not bump our head, not do all those things. We work so hard to try to micromanage and control. And if we can let go of that and so beautifully accept that these bumps in the road are going to happen, that putting them back together and making meaning can actually be fun.
Yeah. I know one of the most beautiful parts of my motherhood journey that it's only happened within like the last year, and it was just kind of like it was an accident, but it was such a breath of fresh air. Is I can't even remember what was happening, but I was very anxious and wound up about something, and I broke down crying in front of both of my kids. And I remember initially feeling like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Like they're seeing me cry. And then as they reacted to me the way that sweet kids do, and they're like, "Mommy, like, are you crying? Are you okay? Like, what can we do?" I realized that like there's so much power in letting them see me be imperfect so that they know that it's okay to have a bad day, to feel anxious, to feel sad, to feel scared, all of those things. And even now, I mean, I don't purposely cry in front of them, but if I have to cry and they're right there, I'm like, well, I'm about to cry and this is going to be a teaching moment for them, to see that even mommy, because our kids do see us as superheroes, even superheroes have hard moments, and that's okay.
Yeah. And not only is it okay, but we're back to sort of where we started, right? Can you be okay even when you don't feel okay?
Mhm.
Right? So that need that many of us have, and, to show up as being and feeling okay all the time, to really be able to reflect, I can feel something deep
Yeah.
and still stand with my 2 feet planted firmly on the ground,
Absolutely.
which is certainly what you did when you came out of this diagnosis and recovery. And it sounds like what you continue to do as you live this life of uncertainty and unpredictability. I have, I guess, one more personal final question for you that has to do with that, which is that so often I'm talking with my clients about what it means to stay steady, even when the world around you is unsteady,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're back to that thing that you said so beautifully in the beginning, which is there's very little we can actually control in our environment. You, for instance, just said it. You can't control where your husband's going to be recruited or when that's going to be or what that will look financially for your family or whether your child will fall and scrape his knee when he's at school or, there's so much that we can't control. And yet, if we're going to do something, let me say this differently, unless we do something, we're going to be sent in a spiral with all that chaos.
Yeah.
So, any words of experience or wisdom or insight for our listeners about how you make meaning of that?
I think that even with all of the uncertainty and all of the unknown things that we all face from day to day, I think that for most people, if not all people, there is a constant in your life, whether that have to do with your faith and your beliefs, whether that be a person or I don't know, there is something that is constant. And I think that finding that thing for you is going to be the best thing that you can do. And really, I mean, what it comes down to is finding what grounds you. For some people like me, that could be spending some time in prayer. For other people, that could be taking off your shoes and going to stand in the grass because there's grass everywhere. It's a constant. I mean, for most of us, even in New York City, we can find some grass somewhere. Finding something that grounds you and that is not going anywhere and deeply is not going anywhere and holding on to that because literally everything else except for whatever you feel like for you is that constant can and might change.
Right.
For me, it's been finding that one thing that I know is true and isn't changing.
Mm, that's so beautiful. What's your definition of mental health?
Hmm.
And
Gosh, that's a
I
tough
don't
question.
mean I don't mean textbook definition. I mean for you,
Yeah.
Allison Jones. What's your definition of mental health?
I think my definition of mental health would be how you how you face what is thrown at you and your reactions to those things because I don't think that like mental health is always like your mental health can be really good, which means that you face all of those things maybe in there's not a better way to face them, but in a certain way. Your mental health can be, I guess would be a better word, maybe strong on one day and weaker on another day. But I don't think that so often I feel like when we say mental health, like it gets just a negative connotation, like, oh, my mental health. But like your mental health, like I'm having a pretty good mental health day today. I'm facing what's thrown at me pretty well today. So I think it's how you face all those things that life brings to you, which sounds an awful lot like resilience as well, to be honest.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing you describe a capacity to be resilient when hard things get thrown your way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, so many different things, can impact this mental health. And that's where we can get, certain diagnosis or not get certain diagnosis, but there are certain things that are internal and external that can have an impact.
I want to just say, Allison, that I think the way you talk so honestly about your inner landscape, which so many women can relate to, about your commitment to tending to your own mental health and well-being. And you and I talked about this on our first phone call, but your commitment to that in service of your kids, right? You know what kind of mom you want to be to those kids.
Mhm.
You know you want to enjoy mothering them. And you know that you got to get some support and got to take care of yourself around a history of anxiety to be able to show up the way you want to, and you're doing it and you're talking about it. And I wish more people would do that, because we look at you, our listeners can't see you. Those watching this can see you. And of course, we'll have your beautiful photo in the show notes, but you show up in such a steady, confident, easy way, while you're also honest about the moments of challenge that you have. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? And I just want to thank you for showing up here in this conversation with such honesty, because more women need to see women like you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, doing it. You're living. You are living, right? And you're also a human.
I appreciate that. You know, when I first started showing up on the internet, I just wanted to be authentic and I wanted to be real. And I think no matter what, that's what I try to give. And it looks different on different days, you know, but I think that there is so much power for all of us in being authentic and like owning our stories, owning the parts of us that make us us. Back when I had the candle brand, which I didn't even talk about because I don't actually have it anymore, but that was like part of the slogan, was like, own your story. Like all of those things that have come together to make you you, instead of trying to like hide these, like let's just be real about them, because they can help and touch someone somewhere. And that's always honestly been my goal, is if what I have been through can positively impact someone, then okay, you know?
Amazing. Before we jump into where people can find you, Allison, anything we didn't talk about today, or any thoughts on your mind that you want to share or leave our listeners with? And you've already said so much, so if you feel complete, no problem, but anything that's lingering that you want to make sure you say or share?
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of piggybacking on what I just said about owning your story. I just will say, like, if you have something that is in you that you keep feeling like you need to share, just put it out there, you know? And as a content creator, of course, you know, what rings out in my head is like, make the video, post the post, but it doesn't even have to be that. It could be writing a book, or not even a book. It could just be an essay. It could be, I don't know, shouting it from the rooftops, however you want to do it. If you have something to say it, and don't ever feel like no one wants to hear this, or this isn't going to matter to anybody, or so many other people are already saying the same thing, because like you are uniquely you for a reason. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And everyone has a story, right? Everyone has a story. I'm really grateful to spend some time with you today, Allison. Where can our listeners find you?
So I am pretty much on every platform.
Yeah.
I am at Allison Mathis Jones on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And I also have a YouTube channel. It is also at Allison Mathis Jones. You can find me there. And then you can also find my podcast that I do with my mom. We are at Kintsugi Conversations on those same platforms.
I love it. We will make sure all of that is in our show notes, And I have said it's been very fun to follow you on Instagram since you and I first passed each other. So thank you for continuing to put yourself out there and your story out there. And I'm really grateful that I got a chance to meet you. So
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, I would love to request that you share it with one mom out there who you know might benefit. You know, there are a lot of women who feel like they're mothering alone, and it takes all of our help to make sure that everyone feels like they have what they need to both feel successful and also feel supported. So please take a moment and just share it with one person. And if you feel inclined, go ahead and rate and review this podcast, because the reality is that the more reviews we have and the higher ratings we have, the more this podcast is shared with other moms out there, which makes it more easy for them to find us. So thanks again for your help with this. And I'm assuming you do find this podcast helpful because you're still here at the end listening to this memo. So thanks for being here, and share away. Sending love.